Listo. Muy buenos días, tengan todas y todos. Gracias por acompañarnos en esta mañana en la conferencia magistral, que es parte del Coloquio Internacional de Historia del Arte, en su edición número 46, que organiza el Instituto de Investigaciones Estéticas de la UNAM y que en esta ocasión ha propuesto un retorno y nuevas interpretaciones a las fuentes en las historias del arte de América Latina. Es un verdadero gusto que Ana Gonçalves Magalhães, quien actualmente es directora del Museo de Arte Contemporáneo de la Universidad de São Paulo, participe en este coloquio. Al comité científico de este coloquio, del cual soy parte, nos ha parecido que su contribución al tema que nos convoca, pues es muy importante. Y realmente para mí es un honor presentarla. Así que me dispondré a darles una breve semblanza de su trayectoria. Bueno, Ana Gonçalves Magalhães, ella es historiadora, profesora titular, curadora y actualmente directora del Museo de Arte Contemporáneo de la Universidad de São Paulo. Es investigadora en el campo de arte del siglo XX y se enfoca en las relaciones entre Italia y Brasil. En ese rubro destacan la exposición y seminario internacional que organizó entre 2013 y 2018 con el título de Clasicismo, Realismo y Vanguardia, Pintura Italiana en las Entreguerras, y el libro Clasicismo Moderno, Margherita Sarfatti y la pintura italiana en el acervo del Museo de Arte Contemporáneo de la Universidad de São Paulo, dado a conocer en 2016. La trayectoria de Ana Gonçalves Magalhães es extensa, tanto en la investigación como en la curaduría en Brasil y diversos países. Ha sido profesora en universidades de Milán, París, Viena, Hamburgo, investigadora invitada en el Getty Research Institute y curadora residente en la Biblioteca Hertziana del Instituto Max Planck. Sería realmente imposible reseñar la extensa lista de trabajos que componen su currículo. Solo me referiré a la reciente coedición de Printmaking in the Americas, publicada por Terra Foundation of American Art. Bueno, les recuerdo que la ponencia será expuesta en idioma inglés y sin más presentación, cedo la palabra a la ponente, cuyo título es Arte moderno entre Brasil e Italia, la formación de la colección del Museo de Arte Contemporáneo de la Universidad de São Paulo. Muchas gracias, Ana, por estar aquí.
Muchas gracias. Buenos días a todas y todos. Me gustaría agradecer muchísimo a la profesora Angélica Velázquez, al profesor Omar Olivares por esta introducción y al Instituto de Investigaciones Estéticas de la UNAM por la invitación. También me disculpo por hablar en inglés, aunque comprenda bien lo español, no sería capaz de expresarme correctamente en esta lengua hermana. Y ahora cambio al inglés. I will read to stick to the time that I have to make my presentation. But before I start my presentation, in which I will talk about the collection of modern Italian painting now belonging to the collections of the Museum of Contemporary Art of the University of São Paulo, I would like to say that what I'm about to present is a stage of my ongoing research that I first presented in the context of a summer school about cultural exchanges between Brazil and Italy recently in Rome. I would also like to say that 14 years ago, when I started working with these paintings, I never thought that the word fascism would be so alive and politically active in my country and in the world. This context, as you will see, has helped me to search for other issues and try to answer other questions regarding the works I have been studying. I'll share my presentation now. Is it okay? Can you see it? Yes? Okay. So the history of the collections of the Museum of Contemporary Art of the University of São Paulo, MAC-USP, is inescapably linked to the image of modernity projected by its actual venue at Ibirapuera Park. Created in 1963, it had a controversial birth. As a receiver of the collections of the first museum dedicated to modern art in Brazil, the São Paulo Museum of Modern Art, MAM, its first decade of activities took place in parallel to a juridical struggle between the University of São Paulo and MAM. I will not have time to tell this story here, but the most important thing to retain is that MAC-USP was born out of the separation between MAM and the São Paulo Biennial that MAM organized between 1951 and 1961. Inspired in the Venice Biennial model, the São Paulo Biennial had thus a major impact in the collections of MAM in the 1950s. What MAC-USP now holds from the former MAM is very connected to the history of the São Paulo Biennial in that period. Before having a building inside the university campus, MAC-USP had its first venue at the pavilion that had become the exhibition space of the São Paulo Biennial, sharing its galleries with a big temporary show. Known as the Pavilhão da Bienal, the building was part of a complex of exhibition pavilions in the park designed by architect Oscar Niemeyer to house the celebration of the 4th centennial of the foundation of the city of São Paulo in 1954. Today, Ibirapuera Park is a popular place for the inhabitants of the city to go during the weekend with their families. Moreover, it has become common sense among historians of Brazilian modern architecture to speak of Ibirapuera Park as Niemeyer's pilot project for the design of the new capital of Brazil, Brasília. Since 2012, MAC-USP has been given a new venue in one of the park's pavilions, thus sharing its audience both with the São Paulo Biennial every 2 years and MAM. It is important to observe that despite its Tupi-Guarani name, the native language of the legitimate inhabitants of the territory that the park occupies today, in Portuguese forest that was once a forest, we will see that almost nothing remains of its original topography and this indigenous community, and that it reveals a conservative and colonialist narrative. 2 monuments mark the park's landscape and reflect such a narrative closely intertwined with the way through which the São Paulo industrial elite of the first half of the 20th century construed its image as the modernizers of the nation, building thus a São Paulo narrative as the national political history. The first of them, located at what can be considered the main entrance to the park area, is the Monumento às Bandeiras by Italian-Brazilian sculptor Vitor Brecheret, inaugurated in 1954 at the opening of the park. The monument had been first conceived to decorate the gardens of the so-called Independence Monument, now the venue of the History Museum of the University of São Paulo, Museu Paulista, built in the location where Portuguese Brazilian Emperor Dom Pedro I proclaimed the independence of Brazil on September 7th, 1822. Brecheret's first version of the monument was presented at the Semana de Arte Moderna de 1922, Week of Modern Art of 1922, promoted by the São Paulo elite as the milestone of modernism in Brazil, and in which Brecheret, coming back from an European period of education, was taken by São Paulo art critics as the paradigm of Brazilian modern sculpture. Such a discourse was certainly reaffirmed and crystallized when the Monumento às Bandeiras was inaugurated in Ibirapuera Park 30 years later. However, it is important to mention that Brecheret changed its form and visual language completely when he retook the project in 1936. It is also worth mentioning that the monument is understood nowadays as a colonialist and oppressive image. The Bandeirantes, militia explorers of the first century of Brazilian colonization process, are depicted here mounted on horses dragging a small canoe, which is pushed by a group of enslaved indigenous human beings. In the last decade, it has become a central goal of numerous manifestations and attacks for activists denouncing the ongoing genocide of indigenous populations in the country. The second, though conceived in the late 1940s, was only finished and inaugurated in 1970. This is the mausoleum of the constitutionalist soldier of 1932 by Italian sculptor Galileo Emendabili. Designed as an obelisk, Emendabili's piece was dedicated to the São Paulo soldiers who lost their lives in the constitutionalist revolution of 1932. This was initiated by the São Paulo elite fighting the federal government of President Getúlio Vargas, who had staged a coup d'etat in October 1930, after leading a revolution against the elections for presidency, which gave the victory to the São Paulo candidate. This was the end of what Brazilian historians titled the First Republic, also known as República Velha or República do Café com Leite, which is characterized by São Paulo Republicans taking their turn with Minas Gerais Republicans to hold the presidency of Brazil, and which made northeastern and southern elites very unsatisfied. Both Brecheret and Emendabili had their education as sculptors in the studio of Arturo Dazzi in Rome during the 1910s. Emendabili would follow his sculptural training through with Adolfo Wild and Arturo Martini. And as Brecheret in the late 1930s had a straight relationship with the modernist critic of Italian descent Menotti del Picchia, one of São Paulo's intellectuals, to create the group Verde Amarelo, a philo-fascist group of modernists that emerged in the 1920s and founded two distinct political movements in the 1930s, the Bandeirismo and the Integralismo. Brecheret's and Emendabili's monuments are clearly connected to the aesthetics Italian fascist representatives had adopted to promote Italy as a modern nation. Their forms and compositions make blatant reference to the sculptural decorations designed for EUR and for the Forum Mussolini in Rome in the late 1930s. Brazilian art historiography has always been at pains to make such links, despite some initial research undertaken in the early 1990s. The same discomfort can be perceived regarding the collection of 71 Italian modern paintings that were purchased in Italy between 1946 and 1947 for the foundation of MAM a year later. Now belonging to the collections of MAC USP, they are probably the most important set of Italian modern paintings outside Italy. And the long silence around them has to do with the fact that art critic and fascist ideologue Margherita Grassini-Sarfatti played a central role in mediating their acquisition. These paintings also revealed other liaisons of Sarfatti with the South American artistic milieu, especially in the constant exchange between the São Paulo artistic circles and the Italian ones during the Ventennio. The involvement of Sarfatti in their acquisition has also determined the way by which Brazilian art historians talked about them while associating them with the notion of Novecento Italiano. The term was largely in circulation in the vocabulary of art critics in South America already in the 1930s, as the region was the only one outside Europe to actually receive an exhibition of Novecento Italiano in September 1930, whose organizer was Margherita Sarfatti herself. It was renewed and used again in the aftermath of World War II, when a series of exhibitions of Italian modern art touring the capitals of South America took place. They correspond to the very moments that Sarfatti was in the last years of her exile in Argentina and helped the São Paulo industrialist of Italian descent, Francisco Matarazzo Sobrinho, buy the collection of Italian paintings for the creation of MAM. In MAM's first decade of activities, these paintings could always be seen in the museum galleries and were always also accompanied by some monographic exhibitions of artists represented in the collection. This is the case of the exhibition dedicated to Mario Cironi in 1949 and another exhibition dedicated to Arturo Tosi. But the year of MAM's official opening in 1949 is mainly remembered by the exhibition Do Figurativismo ao Abstracionismo, curated by its first director, Belgian art critic Léon Degan, a defender of abstract currents in France, such as Cercle Carré and Abstraction Création. He was the first to attack this set of Italian paintings in Brazil when referring to them as, and I quote, the worst products of the most celebrated names of modern Italian painting, unquote. This has also contributed to them being forgotten in time and destined to the MAC USP storage rooms once they came to the university. Although they were partly shown on 2 occasions at MAC USP before, there was no real understanding of them as a collection, which actually corresponded to a certain idea of a coherent narrative of modern painting in Italy in the interwar period under the aegis of Novecento Italiano. Instead, they were seen as a set of artworks that reflected Matarazzo's private taste as a collector, the selection of which would have had no criteria. It was in the exhibition Classicismo, Realismo, Vanguarda, Pintura Italiana no Entre Guerras, held at MAC USP in 2013, that they were first presented as a collection purchased to provide São Paulo MAM with the core of its collections. At that point of the research, Margherita Sarfati was understood as the main intermediary between Matarazzo and galleries in Milan and Rome to buy them. In exile in Buenos Aires since 1939, Sarfati used her daughter and son-in-law as her own spokespeople to negotiate with artists and galleries befriended with her to choose and find the right paintings for Matarazzo's MAM. By 2016, in the exhibition Italiani sull'Oceano, held at the Museo delle Culture in Milan, our research could present the first reconstitution of Sarfati's steps in South America in 2 different moments. The first, in 1930, when she came as a representative of the fascist regime and organizer of the exhibition of Novecento Italiano, the last in which she was actually involved as a leader of the group, and the second when she arrived in 1939 and stayed in Buenos Aires and Montevideo with excursions to Brazil until 1947 as an exile. Nonetheless, if Sarfati concentrated the acquisition campaign, now we have reasons to believe that she was not the only art critic Matarazzo was in touch with, and that a second figure might also have defined certain choices in the collection. This was journalist, gallerist, and art critic Pietro Maria Bardi, who had also been to Brazil in 1933 and came back in 1946 when he was invited to create another museum in São Paulo, later choosing Brazil as his motherland. In addition to being the first contact Matarazzo made with Italy to start the acquisitions, he appears as the agent behind another intermediary who was responsible for what seems to be the first purchase for the collection, Modigliani's self-portrait, which was exhibited in the show that the Associazione dei Cultori Amatori d'Arte in Milan organized on the artist's oeuvre in May 1946. Of the 71 paintings purchased on behalf of Matarazzo, 45 were acquired from the most important Milanese galleries or directly from artists and collectors. Among them, some works helped the interpretation of the whole collection in the framework of Sarfati's ideas of Novecento Italiano and what she understood as classicità moderna. This is especially the case of the unknown work by Achille Funi in MAC USP collections, L'Indovina. The painting was made in Funi's so-called magic realism period, when he was involved with the rediscovery of primitive artists of his native Ferrara and was interested in the works of Cosmetura. His sister would have posed for him for the painting, as for many other of his compositions, including Figura, that once belonged into the collection of Sarfati herself. L'Indovina seems to have been the lenses through which the whole collection has been interpreted, because of its direct connections to Sarfati's taste and the dissemination of her notion of Novecento Italiano in South America. In addition to this, the idea of Italian modern art as associated with Italy's classicizing traditions was again reaffirmed by Brazilian art critics at the presentation of Mam's painting in parallel to a series of touring exhibitions that took place in the region when the term was to be revived. In a review of Bardi's Exposição de Pintura Moderna at the Ministry of Education and Health in Rio de Janeiro in May 1947, Brazilian art critic Mário Pedrosa reminded his readers of the connections between Funi's painting and Italian Renaissance by saying that, and I quote, Achille Funi was born in Ferrara and grew through the study and improvement of the classics of his own motherland, starting with Cosmetura, the head of the Ferrara school in the Quattrocento. Funi imbibed this absorbing stylistic concern that makes him both a modern and a Renaissance artist, unquote. In another review of Bardi's exhibition, he stated, and I quote again, fascism, was the Chinese Great Wall, not only around the best artists, but also around everything that Italian genius bore of authenticity during this long interregnum in which a clown ruled the country like a megalomaniac. And also, now gladly, it is the direct contact that is reestablished between the old Latin she-wolf and us, South American bugres, who speak Latin, end of quote. Better known for his engagement with concrete abstract groups in the 1950s and a leading figure in the promotion of Brazilian modern art internationally, here Pedrosa opens an exception to acknowledge Funi and other artists presented in Bardi's show while detaching them from any discourse connected with fascism. His attention to these trends goes hand in hand with that of the São Paulo group of painters that were at the forefront of the creation of MAM together with Matarazzo, the so-called Grupo Santa Helena, which gathered around artist and cultural promoter Paulo Rossi Ozir in the late 1930s, was formed by immigrants and names associated with the working class neighborhoods of São Paulo. Supported by São Paulo art critics and protagonists of the Semana de Arte Moderna de 22, Mário de Andrade and Sérgio Millier, they were key to the idea of a São Paulo painting school in classicizing modes, mainly exploring landscape and still life paintings. In this sense, it might not have been by chance that Arturo Tosi's Ponte di Zoali finally came into the collections of MAM through Matarazzo's purchases. Most probably a repainted version of the original that the artist had shown in an exhibition at the Glass Palace in Munich in 1931, the painting had been presented in São Paulo on the occasion of the exhibition to celebrate the 50 years anniversary of the immigration in the state of São Paulo at the Italian delegation pavilion in 1937. A copy of the exhibition catalog at Paulo Rossi Ozir's library, now belonging to MAC USP, shows that not only did he visit the pavilion, but also made his notes of appreciation of the paintings on display, including Tosi's landscape, Ponte di Zoali. Ponte di Zoali can be seen as a reference for the São Paulo painters, first and foremost for its Cezanist style, very appreciated by Sarfati, and parallel to the circulation of Tosi in European touring exhibitions of Italian modern art in the 1930s that highlighted his Italianness. Despite its contradictions, both Tosi's Cezanism and Italianness are at the core of Sarfati's argument of his work as key to her notion of Novecento Italiano. In addition to this, the Italian delegation of the exhibition of 1937 was followed by the political touring trip of fascist Senator Luigi Federzoni in the capitals of South America. The fascist propaganda of the Italian immigrant communities of the region was at its peak, and the attempts to gain sympathizers through the issue of Italian identity was a strategy to reach out to them. The selection of paintings for the Italian Art Pavilion privileged artists working with landscape compositions, while these were conveyed to highlight Italianness through what might have seen a neutral genre. In the forewords to the catalog exhibition, the exhibition catalog, artist and commissioner Valerio Mariani states, and I quote, "We could also say that landscape painting is a return to the land, and it's from this new encounter between man and his motherland that emerges the mysterious fascination that many of the works here reveal, as in the case of the best paintings by Carrà and Fausto Pirandello," unquote. Mariani echoes a rhetoric and a discourse that was also largely disseminated at home, where landscape painting was being interpreted in the light of Italian national traits. The transnational survival of such a term in Brazil in the aftermath of World War II bears some key adaptations to the local reality and the local artistic interests. If Novecento Italiano was received in Brazil in the context of Sarfati's exhibition in Buenos Aires, Rosario, and Montevideo, where the promotion of her book Storia della Pittura Moderna was openly discussed in the local press, it was most impacted by other exhibitions organized by the Italian government abroad, where the connections between Renaissance and modernity were always taken into discourse to justify the prominence of Italian art. This is the case of at least two exhibitions that were known to Brazilian circles. The first one is the inauguration of the Galerie d'Art Italien Contemporain at the Jeu de Paume in 1935, in parallel to the exhibition of Italian Renaissance art, and which resulted in the so-called Sarmiento donation to the French public collections, now belonging to the Musée National d'Art Moderne Centre Georges Pompidou. The second exhibition took place at the Museum of Modern Art in New York in 1940, after the major Universal exhibition held in the city, in which modern Italian art and architecture were presented. In 1939, Italians showed their most celebrated modern artists, while in 1940, the most precious Renaissance artworks were displayed in MoMA's galleries. Events like these helped enhance an idea of continuity between tradition and modernity in Italy, which were again to be fostered through the exhibitions of Italian modern art that toured South America in the aftermath of World War II. The exhibition in Paris that resulted in the Sarmiento donation unfolds into another aspect of the support the Italian fascist government lent to modern arts in the peninsula. The making of private collections of modern Italian art, especially in the second half of the 1930s, which resulted in the creation of a public award accompanied by the presentation of these collections at the Galleria di Roma in the early 1940s, and in the framework of which the collections of, for instance, Carlo Cardazzo and Rino Valdameri were shown to the Roman public. In the first purchases Bardi undertook for Matarazzo, there are 7 paintings from the Cardazzo collections, including at least 3 that had been on show in the 2 exhibitions in which he received a great appreciation in the Italian art criticism circle. These are Il Bottegone by Ottone Rosai, Passeggiata delle Amiche or Donne a Passeggio, the work that you're seeing here, by Massimo Campilli, and Tosi's Paesaggio di Val Seriana. Cardazzo and Valdameri appear among other names who had formed collections of Italian modern art in the 1930s. Alongside them, one may count not only Emanuele Sarmiento as a member of the Comité France-Italie behind the donation to France, but also figures like gallerist and collector Vittorio Barbaru, collectors Mario Rimolde, Riccardo Gualino, the first owner of Modigliani's self-portrait now at MAC USP, and Alberto della Ragione, among others. If on the one hand, some of these collectors had indeed been involved with art collecting before the 1930s, most of them became collectors of modern Italian art in parallel to the growing investment fascist governments dedicated to the exhibitions in the 1930s that seems to have led to the public policies that supported these private collections. At the same time, the formation of such collections consolidated a discourse and a narrative of modern Italian art through the repetition of certain artists and works. One can say that the set of paintings that was purchased for Matarazzo and the foundation of the São Paulo MAM reflects this Italian collecting in the 1930s and the narrative of modern Italian art that such collections tended to establish. In this sense, it is quite striking to compare the 71 works now at MAC USP with the 70 works donated by Emanuele Sarmiento to France in 1939, and most importantly, with the 250 works that Genoese Alberto della Ragione donated to Florence in 1969, and which are the foundation of the Museo Novecento at the Tuscan capital. Alberto della Ragione, like Matarazzo, was a businessman with a background as an engineer who became a collector of modern Italian art upon his visit to the first Quadriennale di Roma in 1931. Like Cardazzo's, his collection was shown for the first time in the famous exhibition of private collections at Cortina d'Ampezzo in 1941. At the same time, Della Ragione was also sponsoring the artists of the Gruppo Corrente di Vita Giovanile and supporting the creation of Galleria della Spighe Corrente, through which he played a particularly an important role in fostering young artists who were at the core of the Corrente as from 1939. These were artists Renato Biroli, Aligi Sasso, Bruno Cassinari, among others, with the additional collaboration of Renato Guttuso in the early 1940s. These artists were not only interested in reconnecting with the international avant-garde groups, especially in France, but were also engaged in anti-fascist activities in Italy. The painting Battaglia, 1938, by Aligi Sasso, for instance, in the collection of MAC USP, bears witness to this moment in Sasso's life and his anti-fascist activities. A still life by Renato Guttuso, now in São Paulo, alongside Modigliani's self-portrait, a still life by Ardengo Soffici, and a painting by Scipione, connects the Matarazzo purchases with the collection of Alberto della Ragione. Guttuso's Natura Morta con Lume in 1940 was purchased by Matarazzo precisely at the Galleria della Spiga in 1946, and its immediate provenance is the Della Ragione's collection. It was painted while Guttuso was under the protection of Della Ragione in Genoa to avoid being arrested by the police for his anti-fascist activities. Guttuso was actually sponsored and protected by Della Ragione between 1940 and 1942. The artist had started painting still lifes in his Roman studio as early as 1938, some of which were purchased by Alberto della Ragione, and two of which can be seen today at the Museo Novecento in Florence. They are connected to Guttuso's studies and experimentations for his Crocifissione, now at the collection of the Galleria Nazionale d'Arte Moderna in Rome, a large composition with a still life at the lower front, for which Guttuso was awarded the so-called Premio Bergamo in 1942. The large painting with a religious motive provoked a major controversy upon its exhibition and award, and was forbidden by the Vatican. The contorted forms and complex composition Guttuso explored in it were already present in his experimentation with the smaller still life paintings, and they would reappear in a series of illustrations that he did during his period serving in the resistance, which were published in the album Gott mit uns in 1945. The other painting from Alberto della Ragione's collection that should be considered here is Scipione's Oceano Indiano from 1930. It's through correspondence between Della Ragione and Palma Bucarelli, while she was organizing a retrospective of the artist for the Galleria Nazionale d'Arte Moderna in Rome in 1954, that the painting is confirmed as having belonged to the Della Ragione's collection. Quite exceptional and unique if compared to other works by Gino Bonichi, known as Scipione, the painting had been made for a precise event in Rome in 1930. At the same time, it seems that it was never to be shown again after that. Scipione went out of his motives of Baroque Rome and references to 17th century Roman masses to take part in the Prima Mostra dell'Animale nell'Arte at the Roman Zoo in 1930. The exhibition was an initiative of the director of the Roman Zoo in partnership with artist Cipriano Efizio in the framework of the requalification of the institution, which was by then the venue of the Zoological Research Institute of the city and had recently received important additions for its collections. From 1925, the fascist government had undertaken a closer interest in investing in Italy's colonies in Africa, and the zoo benefited from new specimens and arrivals from them, like a couple of giraffes that came to Rome at that time. This corresponded to the moment in which the Duce had been given a lion, his pet Ras, who would from then on appear in photographs of Mussolini's everyday life news in the Italian press, while he played with it and took it in his arms. The Prima Mostra dell'Animale nell'Arte was an attempt to raise funds for the renovation of the zoo's venue and infrastructure, and was conceived to be the first of a series of art exhibitions inside the park to promote Italy as a colonizing empire. The exhibition thus presented an exceptionally large group of objects and artworks dated back from ancient Rome in the tradition of the so-called animalist artists, while creating an award for young Italian artists. Hundreds of young artists applied to have their works selected by the jury and exhibited in the show. In addition to this, they were competing for a year of stipend in the Roman Zoo to prepare drawings for the Zoological Research Institute. The many plates of reproduction of the works published in the catalog of the exhibition are, in their majority, realist-like paintings and sculptures in which the study of lions, wolves, and eagles are quite recurrent, as you see here, for instance, from this shot taken from one of the galleries of the exhibition. Scipione's painting, along with works submitted by futurists like Giacomo Balla and Enrico Prampolini, stands out for its realist approach and expressionist quality of its surface and brush strokes. From his application of form found at the Archivio della Scuola Romana, we learn that the original title of the painting was actually I Sognatori, the Dreamers. The words Oceano Indiano, adopted for the work's title as it came to Brazil, are written in the background as the caption of an imaginary island or peninsula. On the right side of the composition, there is an orangutan with a melancholic air holding some fruit in one of his hands. On the left side, the depiction of a parrot against a net. The paint has an allegorical composition, which is highlighted by its synthetic qualities, the eerie island in the background contrasted with the concrete traits of the two figures in the foreground. In addition to this, the figure of the orangutan is anthropomorphized with a gray beard, whether it is the portrait of a known character of those days or if it plays with the self-portrait of the artist is open to interpretation. In any case, the painting is somewhat caricatural and seems to be making open comments on Italy's colonial ambitions. The Indian Ocean is actually that which bathed Eritrea, the Italian colony in Africa, to have its territory augmented by the invasion of Ethiopia in 1935. These elements gain an ironic quality when one thinks of the title given by Scipione. Through works by like Guttuso's and Scipione's, the Matarazzo purchases for MAM indeed go far beyond Sarfati's Novecento Italiano, as we see a list of artists that she did not support, nor could have followed their careers in the Italian artistic circles, as in the case of Renato Guttuso, for instance, and some of which were definitely anti-Novecento. This is especially true for the artists of the so-called Scuola di Via Cavour, later to be rebranded and amplified as Scuola Romana di Pittura. In this sense, Pietro Maria Bardi's eye may have come in handy. In the case of Scipione, as the director of the Galleria d'Arte di Roma, Bardi arranged Scipione's first exhibition in the institutional context, together with his partner in the study of Via Cavour, Mario Maffei. Their names would reappear in the framework of the activities of Galleria La Cometa in Rome, sponsored by Countess Anna Letizia Pecci Blunt, having artist Corrado Cali as its main idealizer. The gallery promoted new trends in the Roman circles and played an important role in fostering modern art in the Italian capital. The paintings purchased from Matarazzo thus reveal an intricate social network of agents in São Paulo, Milan, and Rome who formed a modernizing illustrated elite in both countries, attempting to survive above any political compromise in the aftermath of World War II. By the time the collection was presented to the São Paulo elite at the apartment of Yolanda Penteados, then Matarazzo's wife and partner, in February 1948, the associations with fascist Italy had been swept under the carpet. Such an attitude benefited both sides of the Atlantic. Sarfati and Bardi and their contacts and collaborators in Italy saw in Brazil an opportunity to reinvent themselves and start afresh. And Matarazzo used the occasion to spearhead the São Paulo elite in the project of modernization of the country. There are still certain aspects of the so-called Matarazzo collection, especially on what concerns the 71 paintings under consideration here, that have not yet been tackled. We would like now to discuss some of them. The first is that what the study of the provenance of these works has shown is that they constitute a set of private collections that grew in the extremely specific context of fascist policies for the promotion of Italian modern art in the second half of the 1930s. More than reflecting a taste or a narrative of Italian art in the first half of the 20th century, construed in this framework, they implicate these collectors, gallerists, and agents in an overly complex international economic operation. The fact that a powerful member of the South American elite like Cicillo Matarazzo showed such generosity in buying quite a number of artworks from gallerists and collectors that were facing all kinds of distress in Italy, economic breakdown after the war was the promise of salvation for the Italian art market. If one follows the chronology of the touring exhibitions of modern Italian art that came to South America between 1946 and 1951, it seems clear that the Matarazzo acquisitions for MAM were a major impulse for it. In a 10-month campaign that had started with the exchange of telegrams with Bardi's gallery in Rome, already in March 1946, Italian artistic circles of Milan and Rome were made aware of the potential of prosperous new clients in South America. Understanding the social network behind Matarazzo's acquisitions is also key to reevaluating Brazil's place in the international art system, since seen as a passive receiver of the European trends in modern art, the Brazilian artistic sponsors showed a bold and ambitious attitude and were cleverly making use of art and culture to support their own national project for the country. The circumstances of the aftermath of World War II enormously facilitated the purchase and shipping of artistic and cultural goods. They could not be repeated in any other moment in the history of the 20th century, and they are parallel to other obscure activities taking place in South America. Today, the region is known to having hidden many fascists and Nazis that had escaped their sentencing for political crimes. It is worth mentioning that the first impressions Italian painter Pietro Zuffi had when he first arrived in South America with his exhibition Arte Italiana Contemporáneo, also in 1946. And I quote, "I stopped now talking about the exhibition to tell you a little bit about the political situation in South America." He's reporting this to a friend in Italy. "I have never seen in my life so many fascists as I see in these countries. Every day they grow like fungi." Unquote. In South America, the aftermath of World War II saw also the rise of Peronism in Argentina and the struggle of Brazil to have its first free elections in its Republican history after the fall of President Getúlio Vargas and his philo-fascist policies of the so-called Estado Novo. The atmosphere was thus politically conservative. This corresponded in the visual arts to the trends of realism and a keenness for classicizing language, as can be clearly seen in the two monuments by Brecheret and Emendabile mentioned above. This takes us to a second question to consider regarding what might have seemed a dislocated connection of modern Italian paintings at a Brazilian museum. What is the meaning of them for the Brazilian artistic circles and their role in the narrative of the arts in Brazil? Through the patronage of the São Paulo industrial elite, under the leadership of Matarazzo, the São Paulo artistic circle, represented mainly by the Grupo Santa Helena, attempted to establish a style of painting that expressed and conveyed the image of São Paulo as the model for modern art in Brazil. The 71 paintings Matarazzo purchased in Italy for the MAM not only consisted of immediate references for these São Paulo artists, but also provided a very effective model for the creation of a modern art system for Brazil. Its role is thus twofold. On the one hand, the Italian artists present in it were effectively interlocutors of the São Paulo artists in the late 1930s and in the 1940s. On the other hand, they provided the Grupo Santa Helena and its entourage with a precursor in modern art. The third aspect of the choices made in Italy for the MAM initial collection is the fact that this is a collection of paintings. No other medium was considered for the Matarazzo purchases, and in this sense, they differ from other modern Italian collections of the 1930s, for which sculpture was an important part and also played a key role in building the idea of Italian identity. In addition to this, they are mostly small format paintings for domestic space and not for the museum walls. The fact that half of the works are landscape and still life paintings adds another layer for their perception as part of a private collection. While looking at the receipts of the works and the price paid for them, it is clear that Matarazzo had succeeded in arranging a bargain with dealers and artists. They were bought at extremely low prices. Some of the artists were explicitly offering generous discounts. In a way, the prices might correspond to the scale of the works and could also explain why the purchase of sculptures was out of the question. On the other hand, there might be a conceptual dimension to be considered in the choice of a pinacothèque as the model for the São Paulo MAM. Firstly, in the exchanges between Sarfati and the South American context, it was precisely her two books on modern painting and not on modern art that served as the basis for the debate of the São Paulo Circle of Artists. The primacy of painting was also enhanced by the writings of both Mário de Andrade and Sérgio Millier while fostering the Grupo Santa Helena. Their sharing of the studios of the Santa Helena building in downtown São Paulo is understood as part of their collective practice and the love for draftsmanship painting that was required. Knowing the crafts and techniques of painting and showing their perfect mastery of it. This certainly overshadowed two important elements of the lives and works of the Italian artists represented in the so-called Matarazzo collection. The reading of their output through classicizing trends helped reinforce their conservatism and would make their connection to fascism last forever. This might be why Guttuso, Scipione, or Maffei, or Sasso, or Biroli, for instance, were so easily assimilated to Novecento Italiano when they should not have been. The second element to be considered is the variety of media and dimensions most of the artists discussed here have been engaged with. From mural painting to graphic and applied arts in general, to set design and others, both the Gruppo Santa Elena and the Italian artists in the Matarazzo acquisitions experimented in a myriad of ways, and seem to have been open to going from the fine arts to the industrial arts. To shed new light on their contribution to the narrative of the visual arts of the 20th century, one may start by reconstructing the complexity behind these objects and their makers, as well as updating them through anti-fascist lenses. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Ana. Ha sido realmente una presentación enriquecedora, fascinante en el sentido de cómo nos ha mostrado que la formación de una colección pues abre preguntas importantes justamente para el tema que queremos abrir y que tiene muchas implicaciones para las fuentes, sus trayectorias y bueno, tenemos muchas felicitaciones en el chat y comentarios del público que han expresado su interés por esta conferencia de esta mañana. Les recordamos también que están cordialmente invitados a la mesa siguiente, que también se transmitirá en el canal YouTube del Instituto de Investigaciones Estéticas. La mesa que tenemos esta mañana, siguiente a las 12, con el título de los géneros escritos visuales y el estatuto de fuente, que estoy seguro que ahí podremos también continuar esta misma discusión que nos has presentado esta mañana, uniéndote desde Sao Paulo, lo cual pues estoy seguro que todos agradecemos mucho y te agradezco mucho. Muchas gracias, Ana.
Muchas gracias, Omar. Muchas gracias a todos, a todas por esta organización. Soy muy contenta de poder contribuir y colaborar. Gracias.